Okay, so tutorial number 12, and this is on mouse events. These are, I don't have to really explain it, but these are crucial for making games, anything where you want to use the mouse, whether it be shooters, dress-up games, um, really avoid the mouse games, point-and-click adventure games, puzzle games even, physics games where you're throwing things around. It's just it's a crucial part of making games is learning how to use the mouse and learning the different ways in which you can do that. So what we got here in our project file is a couple things. The square, you know that square, and we've got this some source stills here. These are just PNGs I've imported. Um, we actually only need one of those. Get rid of those. This fighter guy here, this warrior. So we've got a PNG of him, and I've created a movie clip. It's just a single PNG, one frame movie clip. Got that, and we got the sword, which is a separate movie clip. Same thing, single frame, nothing in it. So what we're gonna do is in this tutorial, this is gonna be a drag and drop. I don't want to call it a game because it's not really a game, but it could be expanded into one. This could be almost a dress-up game or some sort of a drag and drop matching game, some simple sort of thing where you're moving items around to combine and create characters or something like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to first add our sword to the screen. So what I've done is I've stripped down the project file, the document class I should say, from our last tutorial on keyboard events. So I'm not going to repetitively type the stuff. It's really just stripped down to the basics of an enter frame event and this empty check collisions function that's called on the enter frame loop. So once again, let's create a couple of we have our touching property that's going to be used for the checking of collisions. So let's create another one, which is going to be the sword. Is going to be this sword that we're going to drag around the screen. So we're going to say sword, that's the name of the variable, and what type of object is it? It's a sword object, which once again is linking to the over here, this graphic that's set to export as a sword. So it's sword, and we're going to use the word new, because anytime you're constructing a new object, i.e. you're calling the constructor function of the object, you're going to use the new keyword. And be mindful that every time you use the new keyword, you're creating a new object, which is going to be in memory, is going to take up space, both in terms of the megabytes, the actual size of the project, and we're talking about performance as well. It's those two parts of that. So use the new, create new objects, but just be mindful of what you're creating. And if you're not disposing those objects, that's when you can run into problems if you're creating a lot of them. So we've got our sword. We can now use it. It's a global variable because it's not made inside of any function. You'll notice it's made before the constructor function is even called. But it could be anywhere. It could be down here. As long as it's not inside of a function, it's still global. But it's good practice to put everything you're going to use, all the variables and properties, before you start writing any functions. So what we're going to do when our start game function is called, our constructor function of our document class, again, it matches the name of the class, main. Main, that's the name of the file too, main.as. We call start game, but before we even start the game, let's call add sword. And we're going to add the sword to the screen. Simple function. I just want to get you in the habit of not using the Flash interface to add things and remove things from the screen. So all it's going to do is first set the position of the sword to, let's set it to 300 for the X, sword Y equals Oops. Got caps on. There we go. And then we're going to add to the screen. The add child method adds a child to a parent object, to a display object container, which our document class is a movie clip, which is a display object container. That's a class that it inherits from. So once again, this is stuff that you may not get what I'm saying, but just trying to get in your head that classes all connect, they build on each other, and I'm going to have to do a tutorial that explains inheritance and the different concepts of object-oriented programming. So here we go. Our add sword function just adds it to the screen and sets its position and then adds it to the screen, I should say. So there it is. There's our sword we've added at this spot. And there's our square that's always been there. So now what we want to do is use the mouse to move it around. Next step, breaking things into small steps. Remember that. So we need to add some event listeners. So before we're going to do that in our start game function, because that's what initializes everything. So we're going to put and we're adding these events to the document class, so to the stage basically. And mouse event, we're going to add our mouse down. So this is a mouse down. We're gonna do our start. Let's see. Let's just call it drag sword. So we're gonna drag the sword, and we want another event to let it go. So when are you gonna drop something on the mouse up? The mouse down you drag, and then you drop when the person lets go of the mouse, right? So that these two events are dispatched by the mouse. Anytime you click the mouse down, you dispatch the mouse down event. And if you're not, now the catch is if you're not listening for it, you can't do anything with it. So it's an important concept is what is an event listener? It's something that listens for an event, duh. But the point is, if you're not listening for something and it happens, you can't do anything with it. So you have to first listen for it, and then you have to do something with it when it happens. So the mouse is down, we're going to call this drag sword function. When the mouse is up, we're going to call drop sword. So let's create those functions. So first we have drag sword. You know, I'm just going to do E. I know I'm going against what I did in a previous tutorial, but I like to separate it so you know that it can be named at whatever you want. Oops, this is not an event type. This is a mouse event. So once again, anytime you have a function that's handling an event, so you know what? Let's change this, instead of drag sword, let's call it a drag handler, because it's an event handler. That's what it is. Sorry, I'm gotta get in the habit of myself here. So a drag handler, and you know what? Let's just copy this, save some time. And we're going to have a drop handler. So it's drag and drop. I'll review this in a second. So once again, when you're writing a function that's connected to an event, it takes one parameter. It automatically takes a parameter because it's a handler. It's handling an event. Well, what's the parameter? It's the event itself, which is a mouse event. And we're calling it E. It can be called anything. Once again, remember, it's in black here. It's not highlighted in a color, which means it's our own verbiage. It's our own terminology. It can be called anything. But what can't be changed is it needs to be a mouse event, because that's the event listener is connected to a mouse event. So basically, your listener, whatever event you're listening for, needs to match your function. Makes sense, right? So when this mouse down drag handler, so when you click the mouse down, we want to so what we want to do is we want to start dragging the sword. And we don't even have to figure out a way for this to work, because Flash has actually given us a start drag function as well as a stop drag function. Those are actually properties of display objects, which are inherited by the movie clip class. And remember, we're going full circle here. Our sword, which is the object being dragged, the base class is Flash Display Movie Clip. So that means that the movie clip inherits from the sprite. It inherits from as a display object. It's a display object container. It's a display object. It's an event dispatcher. It's all these type of things down to an object. But a property of a display object is the built-in functions start drag and stop drag. Flash has already figured out how to do that part of it for us. What this tutorial is about is connecting it all and showing you how to use those mouse events to drag and drop things, and when to drag and when to drop. That's also important to know. So on the mouse down, we start dragging. On the mouse up, or drop handler, we stop dragging. So let's do that first before we check any collisions. There we go. Maybe you can hear me clicking because you can't see me, but I'm dragging this around, and now I stopped. So we're dragging this around. Nothing happens yet because we haven't done any hit detection, but we're dragging this sword around. So let's leave it right there. This armless creature that we got here. And so what we want to do next is add some hit testing to it and make our character appear on screen. Or make this guy pop up when we drag the sword over the square. So it's sort of the basics of a drag and drop interface. So we've got our empty check collisions function, which is called in our enter frame loop. Remember from the last tutorials, we have this event enter frame listener. It's called once a frame. As many frames per second as your movie is set to. Once again, mine is set to 30. You can see up here. So 30 times a second, our loop is called, and that means anything that's within that is also, this function runs 30 times a second, so if you have a function within it, that's also going to be called 30 times a second. So we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to put an if statement. Instead of the flyer, it's going to be the sword. If sword hit test object square. Remember, our square is just named square. If the sword hits the object, let's change the touching property to true. We don't really need it too much in this tutorial, but why not? So if the sword goes over the square, touching is true, and what we're going to do is we need to now create the fighter, the warrior, I should say. Let me make sure I called him warrior. Yeah, he's called warrior. We need to make that just like we made the sword, so he can't use something until you've created it. Right? So warrior, what type of object is this? It's a warrior, which is a movie clip in the library. New warrior, we're constructing a new object. The new constructor function is called. Keep in mind you can also, if you want to just set up a global variable but you don't want to create it yet, whether if you're loading a lot of things at once, this is also something to learn. I should mention, if you're going to be hosting your games online, or anything hosting online, like Newgrounds or Addicting Games or Armor Games, any of those, and you're going to be preloading, which you have to preload, you don't want to create anything before your, other than your preloader itself, your preloader graphic, before your game is done loading. You want it to read everything, load it all, but anything that you're creating in your document class is going to be created before your preloader starts, which means the preloader is not going to work. Just keep that in mind. So a good trick, but if you still want to have something be a global variable, meaning you want it to be accessible anywhere, anytime, you can create it, I should say create it in quotes, but not actually put this new and then the constructor function. You're not certain. This line here I'm constructing it because of the new and because I'm calling its constructor function, which I'm signifying here. Basically, the new keyword is what signifies it, and you're followed by the name of the class, of course. But this here is still creating a warrior object, but it's not constructing it. That's a difficult thing to explain. You'll just have to sort of see it in practice. You're prepping it, but it's not actually constructed. But it does exist, and if I traced it, it would not come up null. But it's not on the screen. So anyway, that's just something to keep in mind, a trick for everyone that uses preloaders, which is almost all of us online. So warrior, so now we've got our warrior variable, our movie clip that we can use, and we're going to, so touching is true because the sword has hit the square. So we're just going to load it in. I'm just going to use these stage properties to get you familiar with an easy way to position things in code. Warrior X. Oh, I can't type. It's terrible. So stage width and stage height. Once again, multiplication is a little faster than division, so I just get in the habit of using multiplication. This is the same as dividing stage width divided by half. It's the same thing as putting divided by 2. You put divided by 2, or you can multiply by 0.5. It's the same thing. So this is going to put it right in the middle of the screen. But what we haven't done yet, now watch this. It's not going to appear. It actually is catching the hit detection, but what haven't we done? We haven't actually added it to the screen, which is what the add child's about. So last step, I always set the positioning first, but then you have to actually add it to the screen or you won't see it. You can't interact with it. So that's the first half of the statement. Now we're going to make an else command for what happens when the sword is not touching the square. Set touching back to false, even though we're not really using it. Just tab it to store everything. And now we're going to say if it's, so we can get rid of it, I'll show you first. Boom. There you go. The sword touched the square, and the warrior appeared. Now what we want to do is to actually get it to be based on the hit detection, whether it appears and disappears. So we'll add one more piece of code. And first we've got to prevent ourselves from getting an error, we have to first check if this display object contains what we're talking about here. So we're saying if this contains the warrior, then only will we remove it. You have add child and you have remove child. You add something to the parent display object, in this case the document class, you remove it. So you're always dealing with the parent-child relationship. So we're going to remove, so this is saying if the sword hits the square, set the position of the warrior, which really only needs to be done once, and then add the warrior to the screen. And if it's not, else, meaning, keep in mind, remember the else command, it can't both be true, so if this runs, this won't run, vice versa. If this is not true, this automatically runs. So if the sword is not touching the square, set touching to false, and if the warrior is on the screen, we remove it. Now we would get an error if we weren't first checking to see if it was on the screen. So boom, sword is over the square, now it's not. There you go. And I can leave the sword there, I just dropped it there. I can poke this guy in the eye. And there we go. So that's the basics. I just realized, I think I just forgot. Let's add this to the sword itself. There we go. I'm sorry, I forgot one thing in the beginning. So you actually have to touch the sword and not just detect any mouse event. There we go. Forgot a simple thing like that. So now we're going to drop that there. See, as you can see, on top of the square appears, off the square disappears. Stab this guy in the foot. So that's the basics. And it's really just a simple way of creating a drag and drop interface for a lot of purposes. So we're going to get into arrays and loops pretty soon. And once you learn that, you really can do a lot more. So thanks for watching, and yeah, that's about it.